CGTN, China Global Television Network.
5G is the next fifth-generation mobile network expected to transform lives with its revolutionary speed, connecting millions of devices and enabling everything from driverless cars to smart homes. It is up to 20 times faster than the 4G most of us use now. China has rolled out the world's largest 5G network and recently hosted the first World 5G convention under the theme 5G changes the world and creates the future. But while 5G development is said to offer great potential to connect more consumers, generate new businesses and eliminate extreme poverty, some regions of the world, such as Africa, still struggle with internet connectivity. So are these merely aspirational potentials, or will Africa benefit from the wave of 5G? On this week's episode of Talk Africa, we'll find out more about 5G and what it holds for the future. I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Now, China is among the countries at the forefront in the 5G race and has rolled out the world's largest 5G mobile phone network. The country's 3 state-run wireless carriers debuted 5G mobile phone services, a milestone in the country's push to become a global technology leader. The superfast service is now available to consumers in 50 Chinese cities, including Beijing and Shanghai. Other countries, including the United States and South Korea, also launched 5G services in selected areas earlier this year. Here's CGTN's Timothy Orick with a few insights on 5G and what it has to offer.
If there's anything everybody already knows about 5G, it's that it's fast. Download speeds could be up to 100 times faster than current 4G LTE networks. It also boasts less latency or lag. That's how long of a delay there is between a device like a phone requesting data and the network sending that data. 5G can theoretically cut that delay time down to 1 millisecond, 10 milliseconds at least. But the benefits are likely to go well beyond consumer interests like how quickly a movie can be downloaded. What has the high-tech industry most excited about 5G is the reduced latency. And many are saying this new generation of mobile networks will lead to even more technological breakthroughs. Because communication can take place basically in real time through 5G, self-driving cars will be able to tell each other where they are quicker. Maps will be able to determine a device's location with even more precision, and that's just the start. Many believe it'll revolutionize healthcare. Consumers might see peripheral 5G benefits more immediately with appliances and smart home features. It's the next frontier of household products, using what's known as the Internet of Things. Essentially, in the near future, everything from your car to your toaster to your lights will all be connected to its own network within the larger 5G network. As for now, these ideas are mostly still on paper, but once 5G rolls out and becomes widely adopted, that's when it'll all come to life. Timothy Ulrich, CGTN.
And joining me now to break down the emergence of 5G in Beijing, I'm joined by Andy Mock. He's a research fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. And with me in studio, Alexandria Williams. She's a tech commentator and legal analyst. Thank you both for joining us in this discussion. Andy Mock, let me start off with you because there's been much talk about 5G technologies and the much larger role that it will play than other technologies such as 3G or 4G. What does it mean, though, for people in the technology sector like yourself? Why the excitement?
Well, 5G, of course, as you just mentioned, Beatrice, is just the latest iteration or the latest new set of technology standards. So we started with 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, and now here we are with 5G. So 5G, one of the main things that I think has people excited is the speed. And this just means the speed with which data can be transferred through the air. But there's 2 other things that I think quite important that might not be as well realized. The first is low power consumption, meaning that devices using 5G use much less power than those using 4G. The other thing is what's called latency. And latency is like speed, but it just means the ability to process things quickly with your device. So when we put these three together, it really is expected to be transformational and even revolutionary in terms of the things that it will allow us to do. But what's really, I think, important about 5G is not what consumers can do with it. So meaning that it's a standard, it's a technology that improves the lives of consumers directly, but it's the ability for machines to talk to other machines. And I think this is where people that focus on technology get really excited. So consumers are excited about faster download speeds, and that is a great thing. But I think what will change our world is the ability for millions, billions, tens of billions, even hundreds of billions of machines to all talk to each other. So what might this mean from a smart city perspective? It means things like self-driving cars, self-driving trucks, maybe even swarms of UAVs, so unmanned aerial vehicles that can fly by themselves. Those are some of the possibilities. And if we think about the implications of this, that it will reduce the need for parking spaces, parking garages, maybe even less road space. So there's many, many things I think that we're still just starting to see that will be the result of 5G.
Alexandria, you're a tech commentator. Obviously, this is a very exciting phase for you as well. And as Andy has mentioned, you know, the possibilities are immense. But let's bring it down to the consumer, though, to the global consumer. How vastly different will this be from between 4G to 5G? Because for us in Africa, we tend to think it's about speed.
Right. So for the consumer, and also particularly speaking in the African case, I think that the uses will not be as practical in terms of like downloading videos very quickly, but they'll be more revolutionary in terms of things like healthcare and job training. So I think a really big problem that people face here in Africa is that there isn't really a lot of access to adequate healthcare in rural areas. So because of 5G's higher speeds, people in rural areas might have access to better doctors that can do surgery remotely. And then we also have the possibility of people being able to access different educational devices to help do things like job training that they might not have to access with 4G. But practically speaking, in Africa, you know, in a lot of places, 4G is not built up enough. So in order to have an adequate 5G network, you of course need an adequate 4G network. So for the consumer, I think there is a long way to go here in Africa.
There is a long way to go, though, but even as we talk about the possibilities, we're also talking about the possibility of some of these technologies, you know, taking over in the job employment market. What's that going to look like?
So that's actually a big problem that's being discussed a lot in the US. The fact that with 5G technology, there will be a large amount of job loss because you'll have machinery that's able to seamlessly do jobs that, you know, jobs like manufacturing that previously human beings were doing. And that's a big problem here in Africa because, you know, countries like Kenya already suffer from high joblessness rates. But on the other side, there's this really big possibility for 5G to be something that helps with job training. So let's say that I'm a student in Kisumu, and I want to learn from the best and brightest teacher from the UK. Well, the 5G network will allow me the seamless access to learning from that teacher. So I think that while it will result in some joblessness, it will also offer new possibilities for training and access to new resources. And it's how we leverage 5G that will determine the future here in Africa.
Is that a concern, though, Andy, the whole question of the job losses and being overtaken by technology?
No, I think in general, that always has been a challenge with technology, that it's a double-edged sword. So by increasing productivity, it reduces the need for certain types of jobs, certain types of labor. So while it improves the lives of the general population, it definitely eliminates or reduces employment for certain categories of people. But I want to go back to something that Alexandria mentioned about job training that I think could be very beneficial in places like Africa, in that we think now of 4G, and the way we experience 4G is through our smartphones or a tablet. But with 5G, it may be glasses or something, again, that is what's called augmented reality. So we see the world with our eyes, but there's some sort of screen in between. And what that means then is that that can help with training things like mechanics or even farmers or even nurses and doctors, where they're looking at treating a patient and they're getting guidance through the glasses or whatever device that they're working with that is 5G enabled. But I think that this is two separate but related technologies. So one is 5G, the other is AR or augmented reality. And this could have a transformational effect in places like Africa.
Andy is talking about the efficiencies that will happen as a result of AI, for instance, or 5G technologies. With improved technologies, there's definitely going to be efficiencies. How are businesses, though, adjusting to this? What do you see currently beginning to change?
So particularly in the US, what I see that's beginning to change is that people are already shifting towards using things like drones for delivery. To deliver things like pizza. Amazon uses drones to deliver some packages in some cities. And so that's great, as Andy mentioned before, for eliminating like large amounts of traffic. And then we also, it's also being used to make systems more efficient, like green technology. You know, in the US we face, the US and China faces really large problems with pollution. And a lot of that is ground level pollution from things like cars. So we have 5G technology that's allowing us to circumvent the use of cars and vehicles, which is helping with the environment. So that's a big thing. And on the conversation of telemedicine, you know, something that would be great for Africa, drone technology through the use of the 5G network would allow the sending of medicine from somewhere like Nairobi, where we do have good hospitals, to somewhere farther away that doesn't have access to those things.
All right, so it's really exciting.
It's really exciting.
And a really exciting technology. So, Andy, I just want to come back to the convention that's been happening in Beijing, the World 5G Convention, which is talking about 5G is shaping the future. Now, some statistics show that as of April of this year, 224 operators in 88 countries were actively investing in 5G technologies. How soon are we likely to see a full rollout?
Starting a 5G network is not difficult. So we see, for instance, in China, some of the earliest available of 5G were in places like train stations, so where you can just set up the router, and as long as you have the hardware to receive it, you can get a 5G signal. So that's not too hard. But even in China, I think to see true 5G, ubiquitous 5G, is going to be a major civil engineering undertaking, as well as a major investment in networking equipment. So while we're seeing this taking off all around the world, you know, from developed countries like South Korea, like Singapore, to less developed countries as well, I think the progress is going to be uneven. And in parallel, I think there's going to be a discovery process. So while we can see some of these exciting applications, driverless cars, and in particular, I think healthcare applications. So Alexandria mentioned shipping medicines, but in places like Africa where the physical infrastructure, say roads, are not well developed, the ability to develop blood, to deliver blood for transfusion, medicine, et cetera, is going to be very valuable. So I think we'll see uneven development and development in different sectors and applications as well.
All right, there is an even development, but even as we put up that infrastructure, as the countries that are rolling out are putting up the infrastructure, there are some concerns over health implications, particularly regarding the antenna and the electromagnetic radiation. Should we be concerned?
So there is some concern about that, and there's been research done, and honestly, a lot of the research is inconclusive. I mean, people are still debating whether cell phones cause brain cancer or not. So a lot of the, unfortunately, the knowledge that we'll have about that will be in the years to come. But so far, there's been no real health concerns that have been discovered. So that's a good thing. But there are environmental concerns when you're building. So in order to have a good 5G network, you need to establish something called nodes. And because 5G frequencies are faster, they have a lower radius. So that means you have to have a node here, a node there. And I think that especially in places like, I'm using the Kenyan case because I live in Kenya, having to establish these nodes in a place where there's such lush wildlife really might affect the environment here. And it's something that we should be concerning ourselves with concern to 5G.
Right. Andy, your thoughts on that? In terms of health and environmental concerns, it is still inconclusive. What about the concerns regarding data protection and security?
Absolutely. I think this is an important issue, and it's becoming an increasingly important issue globally. But it's independent from telecommunication standards like 5G. So we only need to look at a desktop world where people are going on to websites like Facebook, like Google, like Twitter, and their information is being collected and maybe used in ways that they're not aware of, and if they were aware of, would be very concerned. So this is an issue not just in places like the United States, but China, the EU. I think these are three blocks, if we want to think of it this way, that are approaching these questions in different ways. So the US tends to be more business-led, meaning that let businesses self-regulate, because consumers, if they're unhappy, they'll stop using Google, they'll stop using Facebook. The European Union has taken more of a governmental approach, meaning that the government says, here are the rules, everyone has to follow them, and we don't care if you're a big tech company, we don't care if you're an American company, you're a Chinese company, or you're a European company, you're going to have to follow these rules. And China, I think, is taking a little bit of a middle path on this.
Right. For now, we are taking a short break. When we return, we'll have more on what 5G holds for Africa. Stay tuned.
Life moves pretty fast. Ideas move at the speed of sound. Technology moves at the speed of light. If you don't filter out the noise, you might miss the details. We pay attention to the details because they matter, showing you a different perspective. See the difference.
Welcome back to Talk Africa. Now, earlier we spoke to Dr. Mohamed Madkour. He's the Vice President, Global Wireless Networks Marketing and Solutions at Huawei. Let's take a listen. So when we talk about the differentiated capabilities of 5G, we know that in some cities in China, the rollout has already begun. What are you able to do? Give us some practical examples. What are you able to do as Huawei with 5G?
Well, it's really different for different markets. So as I mentioned earlier, if you're just looking at the speed of connectivity, then you will get different speed and you will get the immersive experience for things like, for example, augmented reality, virtual reality. You can do things like fancy gaming and also about real-time connectivity. For consumer, you can think about 5G as it's bringing the cloud computing capability to your pocket. But to your question, the differentiated capability actually is how 5G will enrich the industry, will enhance the capability of all of the industries so that it will push the business beyond for more boundaries, and it will also enhance the efficiency for the business.
Do you see new generation technologies as 5G, though, ushering in an even better phase of development for the continent?
I certainly see it. Listen, Africa, and I'm sure you know it better than me, the average age for the median age is 18 years old. So this is by itself, the passionate and young people, those are the people who will execute the transformation. If we set the ambition, if we put the right investment in the ICT infrastructure, if we put the right policy, the future-looking policy, the growth-oriented, and we can set the upskill program and the education for those young people, I think Africa can leapfrog in the innovation and in the industry as well. It is not like a linear thing. You have to pass from 3G to 4G to 5G. Once you need the 5G technology, again, you can add it on the 4G that's in there.
All right, Dr. Mohamed Madkour, thank you very much for your insights on 5G technology. Thank you. Now let's continue our discussion. Still joining me in Beijing, Andy Mock, Research Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization, and with me in studio, Alexandria Williams, tech commentator and a legal analyst. Alexandria, let's look at the various angles of this 5G technology, because we've heard a lot about what's being done in China, what's being done in the EU, and what's being done in the US. Yes. Let's talk about Africa now and where Africa is in this global race for 5G. According to statistics, though, internet accessibility in Africa is estimated at 36% compared to Asia at 54%, Europe at 87%, and North America at 89%. Now, we are talking about 5G. Most of Africa's technology is still, on average, at 3G. Will 5G become a reality, really, in Africa?
I think 5G will become a reality for some, and that's the most worrying thing. Unless proper policy is put in place and proper infrastructure is put in place, it will be this inequitable environment where some people, where the most privileged, have access to 5G and all of the things and benefits that it offers, and where the rest of everyone else will be left behind. So one way that I think that this could be dealt with is that I think that actually the 5G network could be nationalized. And I know people are very worried about, if networks are nationalized and the government has control of them, but we see the Angolan case and the Chinese case. And because the networks are nationalized in China, data is quite cheap. Whereas, in countries in Africa and even the US, data is very expensive. And those who are worried about a nationalized 5G network need only remember that the 4G network, as I said before, isn't even run by a company in Africa. It's run by a company overseas. So in my eyes, I would much rather have the government running my network than a company in a country that I have no access to.
So we are looking at this technology and its immense potential here, and we're already seeing what can be done in cities in China, having smart cities, having a smart airport. Let's look at Africa's position here, because when you look at the potential for 5G, such as AI, and when you look at what Africa is currently grappling with in road infrastructure, building its road infrastructure, trying to provide electricity to all its citizens, how necessary, though, is 5G on the continent when already 3G is proving almost sufficient to serve the current needs of the continent?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something that I've been thinking on. And something that I was even thinking on when 5G was being discussed in China. How necessary is 5G? And I would say that for the mass amount of people here on the continent, I don't think 5G is as necessary as people would like to think it is. I think people love 5G because it's a fun toy, but I don't think it's necessary. I think first the 4G network needs to be addressed. There needs to be a consistent 4G network that is accessible and affordable. As I said before, data costs in Africa are some of the highest in the world. Deal with that problem first and worry about 5G later.
All right. Andy, your thoughts on that?
No, I would agree, but I would say too that the benefits of 5G should be available to all. And one model, because again, I think the real impact of 5G will be machine-to-machine communication. And I know one model that's being explored is not ubiquitous 5G access for everybody, but certain locations, whether that's a hospital, whether that's a certain factory or an industrial park. And that if that kind of conceptual model is applied, I think the benefits of 5G can be more widely distributed. We think about things like agriculture, say, or healthcare, so hospitals. Again, the ability to integrate 5G technology with UAVs so that critical medical supplies, whether that's blood, whether that's medicine, whether that's other types of supplies, can get where they need to go. I think that perhaps is a way of thinking about it versus thinking about how do we put base stations everywhere and make sure there's 5G signal across a country or a continent. I think that might be a more cost-effective and ultimately a more effective way of delivering 5G.
All right, so there's going to be a more effective way. Let's look at that effective way of delivering 5G, because when it does become widely available, we can expect a lot of opportunities in that technology. What are the various opportunities for partnerships in 5G?
So some of the various opportunities, the one that I think would be the most exciting and the most ideal, at least for the continent, is partnerships in education. I think that education and job training are important, and it's the thing that, you see Kenya is one of the most educated countries on the African continent, and that's why Kenya's been able to develop to the level that it has now. So I think that it would be great if some of these 5G companies like Huawei, which is heavily involved in Africa, partners with universities, allowing students to access training and tools that they wouldn't have otherwise. Because as we see in Nairobi, even some of the best universities, like say the medical school, doesn't have access to the best and most cutting edge surgical equipment because it's expensive and expensive to import. So if you could have students who are learning to do critical surgery, learning how to do surgery via 5G and 5G networks, that would be amazing to me. I think, in my opinion, the practical use for 5G here on the African continent has to involve people, because people are essential to how the continent will continue to develop. And there are a large amount of people and a large amount of youth here as well.
All right, so I'm going to get your final comments, Andy, Mock, and Alexandria. And Andy, the world is talking about 5G and the potential, and we've discussed on this program the huge potential for that technology. Is there something that is being left out of this global debate, though? What are your final thoughts on a future shaped by 5G?
Well, I think it's tremendously promising, and if anything's being left out, I would say maybe perhaps a slight note of caution that we're still very, very early days. So just as we look at 4G, when 4G was first rolled out, no one imagined that it would give us applications like Uber, like the ability to order food, etc., on our mobile phones. So similarly, the potential of 5G, I think, is not in doubt, but what specifically it will be used for and how it will change our lives, I think, still remain to be seen.
All right, Alexandra, your thoughts?
My final thoughts, I think, are that, especially here in Africa, people think that 5G will allow a lot of countries to leapfrog stages in development. But what we must always remember is that leapfrogging without investment in policy results in benefits for few but not many. So I think there needs to be a focus on policy surrounding 5G, and my hope is that in 5G rolling out in Africa, we don't forget about the 4G networks that the mass amount of the population will still be using and will still have to use. So let's be hopeful about the future of 5G, but let's not forget about what we already do not have.
All right, Alexandra Williams, thank you very much for that insight. That's all we have time for on this edition of Talk Africa. Big thank you to my panel, Andy Mock from Beijing. He's a research fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. And with me in studio, Alexandra Williams, a tech commentator and legal analyst. Remember, we'd love to hear your feedback, and do keep the conversation going online through our social media handles on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And do tune in again next week for more Talk Africa. From me, Beatrice Marshall. And until next time, it's goodbye.